let's bring them home. Okay?
Yes.
Conservatives can go along with a certain amount of that, but there's some places where we need to have some military overseas.
Why overseas? Specifically,
You know,
I'm curious.
I'd like to bring them all home.
Okay.
But they're up in the Baltic states for one thing, right?
Okay.
What's your feelings?
Well, being the pragmatist that I am, I know even if let's say I was elected president tomorrow and I want to bring the troops home, as we were just talking about, yes, I would agree with that statement to bring them home. We all know that's not going to happen tomorrow. You know, the troops aren't going to be home, bases aren't going to be closed in a day. I mean, even when Clinton went through the conservative effort of actually closing a huge number of bases, that took years to do. And certainly there could be some debate about, you know, what that number looks like. But when you look at the stats for what we spend from the federal government level on defense, we spend more in the United States than every other country on earth combined. Now, certainly we can have the discussion of what does that number look like. And if that number is, let's say, half of what we're talking about right now, then the number of bases would be according to what's left in that budget line. And that's how I would solve the problem, is to where do we need to prioritize what needs to be left once we start cutting those.
So you can compromise a little bit.
I still think eventually they need to close,
Right.
but yes, I do believe that it's in our nature to have to say, look, we know it's not going to happen tomorrow. So let's discuss what that amount should look like, figure that amount, cut it to that, and then let the generals prioritize where that is. If that means there's still some overseas, that's what that means. Now, I would certainly love to see that we're spending, you know, a seventh of what we spend.
Okay, the other issue is,
No, go ahead.
is that's national and state issue is narcotics and drugs legalization and such. The Libertarian Party is okay with legalizing
Decriminalization, yes.
decriminalization. And I have a problem with that.
I understand the struggle that libertarians have with believing in the non-initiation of force, but also in safety. It is a hard line to figure out where you stand. The one thing that I point to is when you look at, we used to have alcohol prohibition in the United States. It worked out so well, we still celebrate its repeal. Okay? We do not have alcohol gangs. We do not have alcohol runners on our borders. We do not have Al Capone anymore because of alcohol prohibition. A lot of the crime and violence and the violence on the border that we see today are because of our drug policies. There would be a lot more people saved because of the fact that we're not prohibiting something and we're regulating it, like alcohol. Now, does that mean everyone should be taking it? No, we already established that with alcohol. There is an age limit to buy alcohol. There can be certainly the same expectations for decriminalizing a lot of the drugs that we're talking about. So certainly that lends to, if you're going to do something against yourself, that's your prerogative. Yes, ma'am.
Can I just say something to that?
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to use this in a debate. I probably won't be able to, so I'm going to use it on you. And the line is, and I just saw you, because you just became a 5th-degree black belt in some martial art. But the line is, you know, people like Whitney Houston and Heath Ledger and a bunch of people that died taking totally normal, legal, medically prescribed drugs, but Willie Nelson lives on. I don't want to use that.
Yeah.
But anyway, let me just say something about this, seriously.
Yeah.
You know, here's the story. 75% of the drug lord's money comes from marijuana. Now, I don't use drugs, I don't recommend drugs. I'm a trauma surgeon. I can tell you that when you go into the emergency room and you see the mayhem caused by substances, it's not marijuana. It's alcohol, PCP, and meth. And I agree, when we outlawed alcohol, we got the mob. When we outlawed drugs, we got MS-13 and the Cali cartel killing our kids in the inner cities. You know, you can't outlaw things and make them go away. But honestly, I think as Iowans, we need to look seriously. We've spent billions of our tax what happened in Ankeny? We now got, these guys, everybody's a SWAT team these days, and it's the war on drugs. And I really think we need to just kind of look at this real issue. And my lieutenant governor candidate came up with this point, and I think it's a very smart one that I hadn't thought of. I like to see hardened criminals in jail. I don't, I think they should be left in jail, the real murderers and bad guys. We're privatizing our prison system, and look at what's happened. If you're a private prison, so there's a follow the money thing here. If you're a private prison guy, and you're running a business, who would you rather have incarcerated? Really hardcore, dangerous, murderous criminals, or a bunch of potheads? I mean, it's so much easier to take care of these guys. So there's a positive incentive to keep the druggies in and let go of these bad guys. And I think that's a very bad trend. And so honestly, from a pragmatic standpoint, we would be ahead financially. I think we'd be ahead socially because when your Aunt Matilda has an alcohol problem, we don't throw her in jail. What do we do? We treat her. If she's a problem to society and other people around her and herself. We should be doing the same thing. It'd be cheaper, and we'd actually take care of the problem. I mean, like I say, I'm not sure that I see a lot of real successful people that routinely use marijuana. So I'm not advocating using marijuana. What I am saying is, it's just not. We're not getting anywhere this way.
You mean the president?
For how many years?
I'm sorry.
What's that?
You mean the president? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. There are exceptions. I'm not sure.
One point I'd like to make.
Reward people who are not successful.
Yeah.
In this country.
Yeah.
One point I'd also like to make is, I have a friend of mine who has MS, and the drugs that she's required to take for pain management are worse than if she could just go get some marijuana. By far worse. So, our drug wars have caused people, to actually have drugs that are really bad for them, that are probably destroying their bodies faster than anything they would take from, just marijuana, which is just a weed, so. Anyway, yes ma'am. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Did I hear you correctly when you said that we spend more on military than any other nation?
Then all of them combined.
All of them combined? Even more than Russia?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
We spend about $757 billion a year. The entire EU is only like 300 billion. So the rest of the world combined is 49%, we're 51.
Of course, Russia and China aren't the EU. We don't have that those statistics.
True. I don't know what those are offhand, but Russia's less than the EU.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing how much money we do spend on our military. In fact, if you look at the federal budget, there are three things that essentially take up the federal budget. It's Medicare, Social Security, and military.
But the military is only 18% of that. Let me just point that out.
Yeah, that's true. But we still spend more than everybody else, and that to me is lopsided. I mean, if Japan wants United States base there, they can pay us for it. We don't need to be protecting Japan. We don't need to be protecting Germany. They have their own money, they can pay for that. There's no reason that we're doing so.
I agree with that.
So, I'm sorry, yes sir.
I find it interesting that you seem to be willing that we put a base in Japan if they want to pay for it. It seems to me like that goes against the libertarian philosophy. If we're to follow our founders' ideas, we should keep
No standing military.
out of those places, number one. Number two, it certainly isn't something that the business of the government ought to be in, furnishing
Mercenaries.
mercenaries.
I agree. I say that more in jest than in actuality, because what will happen is if the United States suddenly decides to charge Japan for the bases that are there, they're not going to have them. The Japanese don't want it. The Germans don't want the base there either. Most of the countries that we're in, we occupied in order to put bases there.
Did you see the reaction that the Germans had when we moved troops to the Balkans? They said that they were really upset with us because the small contingent that they moved out of Germany and into the Balkans, the Germans said made $6 billion a year difference in their local economy.
I believe it.
That I believe.
So I think
Just 2 years.
I think they do want us there.
Right, but if we turn around and charge them for what we have got for services there, I don't think they're going to want us there.
Well,
they only want us there because we're doing it for free, and we're willing to take from our own citizens to pay for their defense. I mean, who's not going to do that?
They're probably willing to owe it to us.
I doubt that's true, because they've never paid it back, and neither has Japan.
That's why they're willing to owe it to us.
That's true. Any other questions, by the way? It's been a lively debate today. It's nice. All right, thank you very much.
Jake Porter is running for Secretary of State.
I'd like to, first of all, thank James and Katie for all their hard work to put this together. Their hard work to put this together is greatly appreciated. I think I can speak for all the candidates in the Libertarian Party of Iowa today when I say that. Before I begin talking about the Secretary of State's race, I wanted to speak briefly about the importance of having local organization for any party. I've been involved with the Libertarian Party for about 10 years and the State Party for about 8. And I can honestly say that I've never seen this much activity as what we're seeing right now. Currently there's about, I think there's 13 groups about to form, and there's 2 others that already have formed. Before this year, we've never seen county groups, or if we have, it's been long before I got here. Now once we have these local organizations, and these county groups such as the Blackhawk County group, we can recruit a large number of candidates. We can influence city government. We can influence county government. And we can actually start to elect libertarians to office. We will be able to identify our voters and get them out to vote on election day. Can you imagine a day when we will be able to actually implement our ideas instead of just talk about our ideas? Now all this is possible, but remember, there's no free lunch with government and there's no free lunch with politics as well. This takes work, it takes dedication. And if we do not have these local groups form, the Libertarian Party will fall apart, just like the Green Party did, just like the Reform Party did in Iowa. That is why it is critical that we get these local groups built this year. That way when Dr. Heeb gets us major party status, which she will, that we have a great organization to build from going forward where we can actually implement our ideas. Now we can talk about the Secretary of State's race. So a little bit about me. My here in Iowa. So the question I always get asked is, why did you decide to run for Secretary of State? Doesn't come across as being an interesting position, when in fact it's actually one of the most important positions in the state of Iowa. In 2012, I had previously seen the Republican Party, through dirty political tricks, try to keep our presidential candidate off of the ballot. And now they did the same thing to us for our candidate for governor in Ohio. Then shortly after moving back to Iowa from Nebraska, I attempted to register to vote at the DMV. And it turns out that when you registered to vote as a Libertarian at the DMV, it came back as no party. The worst thing about this was, it was likely unintentional, but the Democrats knew about this, the Republicans knew about this, and neither one could be bothered to actually fix it. We weren't that important to them. And they spent about $300,000 to find a few cases of potential fraud in the state, but the real fraud was happening right underneath their noses, and they couldn't be bothered to correct it. So I decided I had to do something. I said we have to have someone who is independent of those 2 major parties to oversee our elections. The Democrats have proven they are not responsible enough to oversee our elections and business filings. The Republicans have proven they are not responsible enough to oversee our elections and business filings as well. Now, what would I do as Secretary of State? We have to look at what the Secretary of State actually does. The Secretary of State is responsible for 3 main things. The first one is to oversee the elections. The second one is to oversee all the business filings in the state. And the third is to serve on the next governor, Lee Heeb's executive council. Now, the first thing I would do as Secretary of State would be to cut my salary in half, from over $100,000 a year to slightly over $50,000. And the reason why I would do that is to show the people of Iowa that I take spending your hard-earned tax dollars very seriously. Under a Porter administration, we would actually go aggressively after voter fraud without spending money like a drunken sailor, but the drunken sailors in the Libertarian Party remind me they actually spent their own money. So the second thing I would do is I would work to make it easier to file a business paperwork in the state of Iowa. Now, you currently can file most all business paperwork in the state of Iowa online. The problem is you have to actually print out PDF forms. You have to actually usually seek an attorney to make sure you're filling out the thing right, or they'll send you a form letter and say, "Oh, follow the Iowa code." All this could be done, simple forms on the website. I work for Yahoo, I could get this done. And you should be able to pay by credit card on the Secretary of State's website. Currently, you can't pay by credit card. So you file your paperwork, and then a few days later, they're going to call you up on the phone and say, "What's your credit card number?" Now, this is 2014. What business would operate like that? We wouldn't expect it from a business. We shouldn't expect it from the state of Iowa either. Now, the third thing I would do would be to ask the next governor of Iowa to reinstate the executive order allowing felons to vote once their time has been served and they have paid their debt. Iowa is one of only 5 states that require felons to directly petition the governor to have their voting rights restored after they have paid for their crime and after they have served for their time. In the past 3 years, fewer than 50 out of 25,000 people have had their voting rights restored in the state of Iowa. And I think that's something that we need to look into how to change it. There's a few different ideas we have on that. It's a legislative issue that has to be done, but we need to have a discussion about that at the very least. Now, my likely opponents, they most may be very, very good men, but they are highly partisan politicians and should not be led anywhere near our elections. Paul Pate served as Secretary of State in the late 90s before he lost his campaign for governor. He also served as Rudy Giuliani's Iowa campaign chair. Brad Anderson has a similar story. He's worked for Chet Culver, John Edwards, yes, that John Edwards, and Barack Obama. These aren't not exactly the most independent, nonpartisan person I would trust to oversee my elections. Nice guy, though, by the way. I, on the other hand, though, also a nice guy, but I'm also independent to those 2 major parties. I have business management experience. I have common sense policies and solutions that would make it easier to run a business, vote, and run for office. If I see evidence of fraud, I will aggressively go after it. I can do so without spending a fortune or turning us into a papers, please society. I would utilize the technology and work with other secretaries of state to make sure that voters are not actually voting once in Iowa and then going back and voting absentee in another state or vice versa. The important thing to realize is that the Porter administration would be proactive instead of reactive. We would actually find a fraud before they actually voted. Now remember, you cannot trust the Democrats or Republicans to oversee your elections. And if you want fair elections, you have only one choice, and that is to vote for me, Jake Porter, for Secretary of State. I'm the only candidate that isn't in bed with the 2 major parties. I'm the only candidate who is talking about the real issues and has real solutions. I'm the most qualified, I'm the most competent, I'm the most independent and transparent candidate running for Secretary of State. So I ask for your support and to please consider volunteering to help take this great this historic campaign across the great state of Iowa where our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. You've got one as well.
Didn't you think the present Secretary of State went after voter fraud?
What's that?
Don't you think the present Secretary of State went after voter fraud?
Yeah, I don't think.
Democrats really didn't like him.
Well, I think he did go after voter fraud, but I don't think he used the most effective and efficient ways possible either.
In what way?
Well, we've got computer databases that can basically track. They can all be implemented together, and you could tell if somebody was trying to vote in one state or another. We need to actually have legislative policy that allows us to use better lists than what Matt Schultz was using. We need to actually find out. We need to stop it before someone shows up to vote. The whole idea is kind of reactive. Somebody's going to show up to vote, we're going to let them vote, then we're going to charge them for voter fraud. Let's stop them before they actually vote.
He was also from where you're from, right?
Council Bluffs, that's right.
Yeah, so, were you able to follow him when he was over there?
Yeah, I actually do know Matt Schultz. I ran 4 years ago.
I thought you were both same area.
Yep, both same area.
Yeah.
And he is a nice guy personally. I do know that.
you deal with Grunstall over there?
No, it's, I will give Senator Ronstadt credit. He actually was the one who helped us fix our voter registration issues in the state of Iowa.
Really?
So he was the one. I contacted him up and I said, we've got a real problem here. You can't register to vote as a libertarian. Now, I think you've probably seen there was a scandal in there, said, oh, Republican Secretary of State, I think I can probably do something about this, but, nevertheless, we will give him credit. He actually did help me with that, so I'll say something nice about him today.
So I thought you didn't have any affiliations.
Anything?
I'm just gonna interject here, because I think it's important people to know this. I mean, you're giving Senator Grunstall credit for helping you, but the reality of it is, it's you who influenced that office even before you've been elected to the office. So, I mean, I think you've already demonstrated to us that you have the ability to get things done, and I think it's important to note that.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. Anything else? Well, thank you guys.